Everything is political. That's the basic premise of this video, and it's something that I think is especially important when we try to examine media, and specifically film, in an intelligent or critical way. But to fully explore or demonstrate that point, there are a couple terms and ideas that I feel like have to be defined so that it's clear what I'm saying. So when I say everything is political, what do I mean? First, what is everything? The main focus of this video is going to be on movies and media, but yes, everything in your life is in some way connected to politics, which isn't an idea that most people like. A lot of people sort of go through life under the assumption that they're not political or not interested in politics, which is okay, I understand that mentality, but it's this sort of complacency which I feel is at best a lie, and at worst, something which can negatively impact everyone else in society. For example, the roads you drive on are a result of politics. Your legislators got together, they formed a committee, they did evaluations, they collected taxes, did surveys, and then directed your Department of Transportation to lay out, resurface, paint lines, etc. on all of the roads that you drive on every day. The public school, which you most likely intended, exists for the same reason. And of course, the most famous example is the DMV, which me and all of my homies hate. Now, these are just examples of extremely hands-on, practical politics. But the problem is that most people don't really view them as political because they don't expressly associate them with politics with a capital P. They just sort of might associate them with the government at best. When people think politics, they mostly only think current hot-button global or federal topics. But in practicality, politics and government are usually much smaller scale, especially when we're talking about how they directly influence and impact your life. So here's a short example from my own life. As I mentioned in other videos, I'm a high school English teacher. At my school, I run a book club for interested students that involves, well, kids reading books, but also going on trips across the state to poetry readings and plays. This book club obviously costs money for books, transportation, food, etc. And the first year I ran the book club, I pretty much just sort of paid for most of the materials myself, and then the rest we paid for was some fundraising that we did. My second year, however, I applied to my state for an arts grant from the county with money appropriated from and by the state, so that my book club would actually have enough money to do the things I knew the kids wanted to do. My county arts board was very generous and helpful, and I ended up with a wonderful grant that basically saved my book club. One of the stipulations of accepting this grant included me sending a thank you letter to all my local representatives. That included my state senator and representative, people who work in my state capital, not people who actually go to Washington. Now, I knew quite a bit about my representatives already, and I was pretty sure that they hadn't voted for the bill this money was assigned to. A quick search on my state's legislative record, and bingo, I was right. They voted no on that bill. Neither of my Republican representatives voted yes on the Arts and Legacy bill this money was attached to. Money that, among other things, went to maintain parks, trails, and public water. Just really nasty stuff. Bad things you definitely don't want the state or anybody to take care of. So, I did still send these people cards and had all my students sign them. I wrote out a letter explaining why these funds were important, what they meant to the kids, and what we used our grant on. One of my two representatives replied and said that while she was glad I got the funds, she couldn't support other things the money went to. She provided no further clarification, and I was deeply puzzled, because, again, I had read the text of the bill and saw where that money went. And so this is all a very long-winded way of explaining that everything in your life, whether it be parks, trails, or book clubs, is connected to your local, state, or national politics, and the decisions you make or don't make on your ballot impact the opportunities that people around you have or don't have. These small bread and butter issues tend to just sort of fly under the radar, however, because they're boring and bureaucratic. I get it. People tend not to pay attention to local government until it doesn't work or they need it for something unique. They have to call the fire department, or a new zoning law impacts their property, or, most common, taxes go up, which is pretty much all people's political awareness boils down to when it comes to their local government. In other words, most people only really consider politics, or government, insofar as how much said government does or does not inconvenience them, which basically will boil down to taxes, the DMV, and gas prices. But as for people who claim not to be political or into politics, I feel like they're either willingly sticking their head in the sand or living in a place of privilege where they aren't a protected class or at risk of losing anything to the ebb and flow of political power. Or, at least, they don't think they are.
We have international law. On this earth, every act is a political act.
When people are saying X is too political, they aren't protesting politics. They're protesting politics they don't like. Politics that take them out of their comfort zone and give them something to bitch about, which is always a plus. Yes, films have always had agendas, and independent art has always leaned more left than right, but people don't usually feel obligated to be consistent. If you're demanding consistency from them, whether in your thoughts or in your arguments, then you are tremendously missing the point. People who see you and what you stand for as the enemy will take pride in being inconsistent, because it makes them harder to hit. Now, to be clear, I did not write this. This is just a great response that I found on the most academic of all sources about this exact topic. Jokes aside, however, this point I feel is largely true. Remember, everything is political, but people don't protest everything. But before I can go further with this, I have to define political just like I defined everything. A simple Google search defines politics as the activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Great. However, I would like to add how I view and define politics, which is basically philosophy in action. After all, the founders of democracy, be they Athenian, American founding fathers, whatever, were basically just philosophers. Effective politics is or are the exploration of ideas, and the legal implementation of said ideas to reach a legitimized form of common good through the consent of the governed. However, in the year of 2024, specifically in America, that's not generally what comes to mind when most people consider politics or the purpose. Again, we tend to focus on the big, hot-button issues: guns, race, abortion, sexuality, immigrants, climate, police, etc. And so I'd make the case that for the vast majority of Americans, audiences, whatever, something is only political if it's present, or specifically, present politics they don't like. But politics aren't just limited to those specific things, remember? And so there's one other important distinction I feel like I need to make. We can view political works in two ways: works which are expressly, at their core, made to be political, and works which lend themselves to political and critical readings. A lot of people might say there's no difference between these two things, and in some cases they're absolutely right, but I figured I'd throw it out there just, to be safe. Specifically, we have overtly political films, things that are literal political thrillers or like political biopics. It is impossible to make a movie like Vice on the basis of sex, J. Edgar Hoover, Amistad, All the President's Men, Detroit, or Black Klansman, and not dive into politics. That would be antithetical to the point of those movies. You go see one of those flicks for the politics. They're made to be political. On the other hand, most, if not all, other movies somehow at least lend themselves to a critical reading which somehow connects back to politics. But the movies themselves aren't explicitly about politics sort of on the surface. I'm talking your classic, good old-fashioned academic critical lenses, examining a text through a feminist lens, a Marxist lens, an environmental lens, a racial lens, etc. Pretty much every film of artistic merit will somehow lend itself to one of these critical readings. Pretty much every mainstream blockbuster franchise you can think of is going to have a political message or lend itself to political readings. And before you comment there are other movies than mainstream blockbusters, I know. It's just that smaller or indie films of substance are generally more explicitly political than the big blockbusters, even though most of these mega franchises still aren't particularly subtle. I just want to focus on bigger blockbusters because those are the movies people get mad at, not really indie movies. No one's getting pissed off at like Minari or Reservation Dogs for being political, because no one's stupid enough to get mad at Minari or Reservation Dogs for being political is probably watching Minari or Reservation Dogs. For example, let's take a look at a movie like the recently released Twisters. Just a nice, simple, non-woke, 4-quadrant blockbuster about, unprecedented weather disasters and the efforts by scientists to stop them? No, wait, that can't be right. A guy I'm friends with on Facebook proudly declared of the film that it's just very entertaining. I was particularly relieved by the lack of political BS and lack of identity politics. But I mean, he's right. After all, what's political about a multi-ethnic group of characters working together to stop the effects of an unprecedented spike in severe weather events, climate change, which is being used by a land speculator, capitalism, to take advantage of and exploit poor rural people who are being disproportionately hurt by said weather disasters, all while acknowledging the existence of said problems but doing nothing to actually help stop them, as that would cut into their profits, like oil companies. The film also includes a scene where a tornado is literally destroying a town, and the main characters, scientists, urge a couple to seek shelter, but the couple instead bitches about hotel amenities not working, says the tornado sirens are a false alarm, refuse to seek shelter, and then immediately die. Could it maybe be a metaphor for people denying climate change? Could it maybe be commentary on people not following scientific advice during COVID? Who am I kidding? Big twister spin, no politics here. I made the case that most audiences register present as political, and here's what I mean by that. I was at a dinner with some friends recently, and somehow politics got brought up. Not by me, believe it or not. Generally, nobody around me, where I live, has the same politics as me. nor do I really just expect that anyone in general wants my unsolicited opinion on politics or anything, except on YouTube, of course, so I was pretty much keeping my mouth shut. But at some point, though, my friend said something and I just couldn't keep my dumb mouth closed anymore. My boy's yapping on about something, this is why I don't agree with critical race theory. And since education got mentioned, I broke my silence. I say to my buddy,
"You have to read To Kill a Mockingbird when you were in school?"
And he says,
Yeah.
And so I ask,
"Did you like it?"
And he says,
Yeah.
And I say to him, I says,
"That's critical race theory, bud."
And it is. Just like feminism or Marxism, critical race theory is something which has existed basically forever in academics. It's the practice of looking at a text or system or whatever through the context of how the race of the people involved changes or could change or determine the outcome, whatever that thing is. You can do structural readings with it, intersectional readings concerning Marxism and feminism or the environment or whatever. The point isn't just white people bad. I mean, like, it can be, but that's not really the whole idea. Okay, just one more example of this and then I'll drive my point home.
Now watch this drive.
Because I'm a crabby, antisocial loser, I don't have any friends my own age. My best friends in college were my professors, one of whom was an ancient political science teacher who also used to be a state representative. And one day in his class, I learned the troubling fact that Thomas Jefferson made some babies with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, who was also like a lot younger than him, and related to his dead wife. And when I learned that, I thought, wow, that's kind of weird, kind of messed up. Interesting though. Then my professor explained to us how long it took and how difficult it was for the mixed/black Hemings side of Jefferson's bloodline to receive acknowledgement from the white and Jefferson side. We even watched an interview with a white descendant and a black descendant talking about the whole thing. It was really cool and interesting. And I will add, just for the Redditors out there, that yes, I know technically Jefferson himself cannot be pinned as the father of Sally Hemings' children, just a male Jefferson somewhere in the bloodline, but if you're, like, operating in good faith in the historical scene, it's pretty widely recognized that that person was probably Thomas Jefferson. Anyway, a year or two later, there's me, crabby and friendless, having dinner with my former professor. And at one point, my professor makes a comment similar to my other buddies, where he says,
Critical race theory bad. Not good.
And I'm like, wait a minute. You teaching us about Sally Hemings and the lives/difficulties of her descendants is critical race theory.
Where's the disconnect? Here's my theory about the disconnect. Because To Kill a Mockingbird and Sally Hemings are, like, old, they're not political. Things are only political when they're present. Not that people also don't get mad when the founding fathers are, like, indicted for race-based offenses or whatever, but it's not really as common or loud or mainstream.
No one ever talks about it. They just do it. And you go on with your lives, ignoring the signs all around you.
But as years go by, it's becoming pretty apparent that media literacy, our ability to discern meaning and context in a piece of art such as film or literature, has been severely diminished. It seems audiences today are not concerned with understanding a film or thinking much about it past the exit doors of the theater. But the sooner we understand the concept that all film is political, the better we're going to understand the world and the people around us.
To be clear, I know that works like To Kill a Mockingbird and the Hemings situation have drawn controversy over time, and like To Kill a Mockingbird gets abandoned and stuff, but my point is that they don't, in general, draw quite the same cultural ire as some of these more mainstream blockbuster movies or books, and it's because people aren't really being told to be angry about these things anymore. Back when I was a young boy, knee-high to a grasshopper and whatnot, my mother had a copy of The Color Purple by Alice Walker. She never had a bad word to say about it. She even expressed praise for Whoopi Goldberg. But now, however, my mom is firmly on the anti-woke train and anti-political movie train. She even refused to watch Barbie. And you know why? It's because of this guy.
No, you can't parallel park. That's what makes you a woman.
Old Shen Bapiro deserves his own whole video dedicated to his dogshit movie takes and lack of media literacy, or at least his inability to watch or enjoy media which doesn't neatly align with his worldview, but other people have already done that, so I ain't gonna. Point is, there was no manufactured outrage against political content until the past, 15 years, at least not in the same way. There was tons of political content and it was often mainstream, like The Color Purple, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Green Mile, Remember the Titans. But what do all of these movies have in common, other than somehow focusing on racism and the systems which perpetuate it? They're set far back in the past. And because they're set in the past, they kind of get a pass. But it's only when works are set in modern times or have modern casting that people get mad. Usually, as we all know, because a woman or minority is cast in a starring role, and, God forbid, they take the role of a previously established white character. And, it honestly makes sense. If your understanding of politics boils down to woke bad, woke equal black and gay and woman, then yeah, I guess you'll be mad all the time. And to be clear, there are a lot of political, woke, progressive, whatever movies that suck. But you know what? That's definitely not because of the actors or politics. It's because they're just being poorly written. And I know this is the defense a lot of neckbeards use, but like, it's weird they also tend to attack those black and women actors specifically, and lob those characters with criticisms they would never have for male or white characters and actors. There's just a different standard there.
People love what I have to say. They believe in it. They just don't like the word Nazi. That's all.
This will be another short segment, but it's something I find interesting, so it's staying in the video. Staying in the video! I want to address potential criticism by addressing whether or not I think people, including myself, can watch and enjoy films or read books which espouse a political ideology they don't personally agree with or ascribe to. Yes, they can. Providing they aren't just like racist or bad faith commentators, I think this is really easy, and is kind of like the entire point of art and media, and also its best use. To open up conversations people might not be having with themselves or with each other. There's a pretty clear and well-known record of art being used to change minds in politics. The most famous example is probably Uncle Tom's Cabin. But can, or does, that still happen in 2024? I think it can, and I think it does. But people actively want to undermine positive messages, such as racism is bad, will frame modern works with that message as unnecessary, or woke, or just bad, and instead point to some hypothetical work or action they say is the real solution, knowing full well they'll never have to back up or support said work or solution. Therefore, absolving themselves of ever having to confront something like racism while also simultaneously allowing themselves to appear as anti-racist. Ben Shapiro and Star Wars fans are great at this. To illustrate this, I direct you to the two great paragons of I don't hate strong women characters, I hate poorly written female characters. Those paragons being Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley. People love to use these two gals as their get out of jail free cards while sending death threats to Leslie Jones and Daisy Ridley. And yet, for as old as they are, Alien and Terminator are still very political. Especially Alien. I mean, the villain is literally called The Company. And in Aliens, the worst guy, Burke, works for The Company. And in Aliens, the Space Marines are a clear satire of the actual US military, and the military's association with The Company, i.e. capitalism, i.e. the military-industrial complex, and that's portrayed as a bad thing. That's a pretty Marxist argument for a non-political action movie led by a woman who's smarter and stronger than all the men, and which is otherwise populated with gender-bending characters like Vasquez and Ripley herself. Does this mean that modern audiences who hate Ray and hate Marxism and hate socialism are actually chilled with all those things because they're like a movie that has a political ideology they don't agree with? No. It just means that they're probably missing the point of that movie. But to that point, I do maintain that it's possible and healthy to watch media which doesn't align with your worldview. I love Gone with the Wind, and that's pretty racially insensitive. I enjoyed Bone Tomahawk, even though I think its analysis of the Old West and depiction of natives is kinda sus. And as people in the comments love to point out, I'm a fan of Harry Potter, even though J.K. Rowling is icky. Now, is there another conversation to be had about the ethics of consuming and supporting said media from crappy sources or people or artists? Oh yeah, for sure. But that's not the point of this video. Sorry. I think that one of the things which saved me from going as far down the alt-right pipeline as a lot of my fellow teens from the 2010s did was my addiction to movies and willingness to watch anything. I pulled up to Detroit and BlacKkKlansman at a time when I was highly skeptical of racial protests and BLM. I thoroughly enjoyed both those movies, despite being an avid listener of the previously mentioned Ben Shapiro. During that same time period, I spent a lonely Valentine's Day night getting over a breakup by seeing Love, Simon, all by myself, at 10 o'clock p.m. This was media that, on paper, I wouldn't have technically agreed with, but that I, ended up liking and agreeing with. And you know why? It's because I didn't actually, at my core, probably really believe and think the things that I thought I believed and thought at the time, because it was manufactured just anti-woke, shallow outrage, crafted by people like Ben Shapiro and The Critical Drinker to get clicks and views. I know I'm not the only one, but I spent the majority of my teens thinking that I was at least somewhat conservative, and spent a lot of time watching anti-woke SJW Gets Owned videos on YouTube. I started to tumble down that pipeline, but I was lucky enough to get out largely because I just watched and read everything that I could get my hands on. I think this is what saves a lot of people. Intellectual curiosity. By actually watching and engaging with this political media, I found that it was actually interesting and sensitive, and it made me consider things from another perspective. This is really important, especially when you're a teenager. But why then do movies which are technically progressive or left still resonate with me more than movies which are probably ideologically conservative? Well, it's because
Today, the greatest friend to the revolution will fire the shot to end all wars.
Yikes. I know that's a big claim, but you know what? I think it's true. At its core, art fundamentally questions and interrogates people, systems, humanity. It explores the contradictions of our world and asks why injustices must remain as injustices. Art loves to make us root for the little guy and tell us stories that otherwise get swept under the rug. It revels in the triumph of good against evil and the progress of good people doing good things. Ideologically, a lot of this aligns with political leftism. A definition from Britannica explains leftists as hostile to the interest of traditional elites, including the wealthy and members of the aristocracy. In other words, leftism, in contrast to liberalism, seeks to question and deconstruct systems of power which can hurt and oppress the common person. Look at something like Star Wars, Aliens, or The Boys. All of these stories focus on a small person or group of people initially lacking power, being pitted against a larger, more powerful, and ruthless force which hurts and exploits the underdog in order to maintain power. That's pretty political, and that's pretty leftist. Which is why it's absolutely hilarious to me when Elon Musk, of all people, posts a meme like this, as if he is somehow the underdog or the vulnerable class rebelling against a machine or system of power. What? Dog, you are literally the bad guy in all of these books and movies. Now, conservatism, on the other hand, typically falling on the right of the Overton window, is founded in believing in the value of established and traditional practices in politics and society. Now, there is a case to be made for something like Star Wars actually being conservative, in the sense that it advocates for a dissolution of a large governing power. Sure. However, this neglects the fact that that large governing power, the Empire, isn't just abolished, but totally replaced and rebuilt as a democratic democracy, helmed by the multi-special Rebel Alliance. I don't want to be reductive, but in an Ayn Rand, Ben Shapiro conservative type of art, guys like Homelander, or the Emperor, or the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, or David Cornsweet's character in Twisters, or like O'Hare in the Lorax, are actually the good guys, because they're maintaining a status quo and conserving social systems as they already are. In Homelander's own words, they should win because they are
stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better! I am better!
This is a classic Randian Ubermensch mentality. Might makes right, as T.H. White would say when writing a villain. Conservative art is about maintaining the status quo, especially through inherent levels of hierarchy, mixed with a healthy dose of persecution and martyr complex. Again, exemplified when Homelander says,
I am done being persecuted for my strength. You're not the real heroes. I'm the real hero.
For a very illuminating example of all this, I invite you to take a look at Conservapedia, did I say that right? Specifically, Essay, Greatest Conservative Movies, where a nice conservative person picked out their list of favorite movies which are conservative, and tries to explain why. Here are some highlights. American Graffiti, directed by noted conservative George Lucas. Perhaps the greatest success by any low-budget movie in history. I've seen more than 200 times in production costs. It contains many conservative values, with funny mockery of liberal behavior, including a conservative about how well-intentioned high school grads in 1962 end up. If this movie was victimized by one of the worst political snubs, zero Oscars. Black Panther, based on the eponymous Marvel comic superhero, the 18th installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, tells of a young African king who gained enhanced strength from consumption of a majestic heart-shaped herb, fighting against the force of a black supremacist who seeks to take away the king's throne. In the name of morality, this king, or the Black Panther, seeks to destroy the villain and his plans to overthrow the other races and governments of the world. The Black Panther recognizes both the importance of helping those in need, as well as not going beyond one's governmental authority. Though there are plenty of pagan religious references, the film appeals in some ways to a general sense of Christian morality and governmental justice, and it never diverts into political correctness about black supremacism. Liberals have attempted to adopt Black Panther as a liberal film because of its predominantly black racial cast, while ignoring the conservative subtext that clearly shine through. Blazing Saddles, a politically incorrect western, something liberals are sure to despise. Iron Man, the first installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, stars Robert Downey Jr. as comic book hero Tony Stark, an initially unsympathetic billionaire weapons developer with hedonistic habits such as alcoholism, extramarital sex, gambling, and drug use. A theme of redemption then follows when, on a tour in the Middle East, Stark is almost mortally wounded by the evil Islamic terrorist group the Ten Rings, inspiring Stark to turn his life around and build weapons for just causes, not solely for making money. Though he considers giving up weapons development altogether, Stark decides to stand by his Second Amendment rights and builds his first electromechanical suit of armor to escape the Ten Rings upon realizing that his supposed friend Obadiah Stane has been issuing guns to the terrorist men's back. Overall, Iron Man teaches that capitalism and the military can be used for good. That being said, the aforementioned revelation Obadiah Stane had been issuing weapons to the Ten Rings as well as orchestrating Stark's abduction by the murder could be interpreted as subtle anti-war on terror messaging. Yeah, it's so subtle. As you can tell, I just scrolled by alphabetical and picked the first few titles that jumped out to me. I hope they speak for themselves, especially Iron Man. Now, I will say, the MCU movies in particular have fallen under attack from leftists, not liberals, for being conservative in the sense that they do often see a return to the status quo, except that, now the good guys are in charge of those systems instead of the bad guys. Iron Man himself and Captain America are usually the target of this, but again, that's a subject for like a whole nother video. I don't think any of that makes these movies conservative. What I think is more revealing about this list is its mental gymnastics to make art fit into the conservative viewer's fantasy of what they want or think this art should be. I would never try to bend a film with conservative messaging to fit a liberal worldview, because why would I want to, even if I did enjoy the movie? I just don't see the point of it, nor do I feel the need to only engage with content that supports my worldview. I don't go out of my way to watch movies hoping they'll tell me what I want to hear. I don't like fucking look up the politics of the people that made it before I watch it. I go to the movies and read books to see what the authors of the text have to say. And as long as they say whatever it is in a compelling manner, I'm pretty much down for anything. Okay, like I wouldn't be in line for the premiere of the new Leni Riefenstahl film, but like, I hope you get the point.
Oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics.
To the point that some audiences only wanting non-political films, or at least movies that don't have politics they don't like, we've seen a few things. First, we've seen the rise of movies which attempt to hide or erase their politics, either from their marketing or their story. And second, we've seen the rise of works which are, in fact, made explicitly for a conservative audience, and with a specific conservative bent to them. The most famous and recent apolitical movie I can think of is Top Gun Maverick, which was so successful in part because it wasn't political. And you know what? Yeah, I'll go out on a limb and agree that Maverick wasn't political in the way that most audiences view political. It's pretty well documented how much work went into making sure the faceless bad guys in the movie could be anyone, so as not to offend China, Russia, Iran, or any other potential US enemy, and most importantly to, get that money. But beyond that, Maverick follows in the footsteps of its predecessor and goes out of its way to show how cool Maverick and pilots in the Air Force and the military actually are, and in that sense, is political. Because remember, the military, like everything, is a political body. The military, and by extension United States, is portrayed as pretty unabashedly good and noble. The military-industrial complex is essential to the lives and safety of everyday Americans. This is a political message, and as a result, a lot of left-leaning people took issue with the film, while many audience members celebrated the film for its lack of politics, lack of women, and lack of minorities, even though the film has all of those things. Maverick is a movie about largely maintaining the status quo, at the very least, traditional politics. No systems are challenged, no deep questions asked, and yet, that still makes the film political. It's just palatably political because it's mainstream and supports the status quo. Now, does this mean I think the movie's bad? Of course not. I enjoyed the hell out of Maverick, and I can do so while still recognizing that as a result of its politics, it's a pretty shallow and unimagined movie that, while doing so effectively and endearingly, still only puts its characters through the most basic and cursory of character arcs and growth. But a second and very different movie, which made an attempt to remain apolitical but certainly wasn't, at least in my view, is My Sweet Baby, Civil War, from our man, Alex Garland. Despite being excited for it, I was still pretty nervous about this movie before it came out, and started sweating even harder when my boy Alex came out claiming that the film wasn't political. My brother, the movie is called Civil War. How could it not be political? Not to mention a marketing campaign which largely focused on Texas and California being in an alliance, and I was a little concerned that we were in for something with the political acumen and depth of, like, the Purge franchise. But luckily, I was wrong. Civil War is apolitical in the sense that it doesn't apply direct American labels to its politics, which, as we've covered, is mainly all an American wants, means, or looks for when it comes to political works. However, Civil War is clearly political in the sense that it makes arguments about specific political ideologies which appear as more abstract and nameless to your average audience member, which I believe is what led to the film having such mixed to negative audience reactions. Nick Offerman kind of explained the whole thing well in an interview when he stated,
"It's so unrelated to any actual factions or politicians." That's what I think is so brilliant about this film, is that everybody on any side of the aisle or any faction has a lot to say, and we're all immediately divisive and partisan in our conversations. And this movie transcends that and has none of it. It's about all of us, and I'm so grateful for that. I think it's so brilliant. It's so thoughtful of Alan. And instead, this is like a great novel. It's for everybody to say, oh, maybe heading towards war in our country is not the best route. Maybe we should reconsider the direction we're heading.
But even with that in mind, the film does take aim at, or at least ask the audience to question and take aim at, specific systems and ideologies which can and do lead to civil war. For example, little pieces of information about Nick Offerman's character. The president come together to paint a pretty clear picture of an autocrat or wannabe dictator. We learn that the president disbanded the FBI, is currently in his 3rd term, and will execute journalists on sight. Additionally, the characters make reference to something called the Antifa Massacre, which I interpret to mean the government massacred Antifa protesters. Now, there are several ways that you can read all this, and different people will see it different ways, which is the point of the movie. The journalists and text of the film ask questions, leaving it up to the audience to decide what is what, who is who, and what is right. But as for me, when I take these details together, I can't help but recognize we only have one political candidate in America who has joked about being a dictator, talked about having a 3rd term, has open disdain for the press, called for the execution of Antifa protesters, and staged a literal coup on the United States government. And lastly, to that point, the worst guy in the film, played by Jesse Plemons, is literally just there to be a racist nationalist, and specifically has beef with the brown people, particularly the Chinese guy from Hong Kong. Let me think. Which political ideology in America is really nationalist right now and kept getting in trouble a few years ago for attacking Chinese people? But yeah, the film's totally not political. Now let's say you want to swing the other way. America has only had one president who lasted in 3 terms, and that was FDR, a Democrat. FDR also sought to highly reform our systems of government to consolidate power, see his goals with the Supreme Court for one, and he went after Father Charles Kaufman Jr., an influential radio news host who was once an ardent FDR supporter, but eventually basically became a Nazi mouthpiece. Not to mention, FDR had that little incident of locking up Japanese people in internment camps during World War II, which, isn't great. That's not a sleigh. So if that's the reading you want to take a civil war and the historical basis you want to use to defend its politics, that's cool. But, well, the movie is still political. To me, though, just because Civil War and Maverick avoid labels, they don't get to escape being political. They are. The difference is just that Civil War is ambiguously nuanced, and Maverick, I feel, is just shallow. We get a similar fact with self-professed political thrillers like Captain America the Winter Soldier and Captain America Civil War. While I do love both these movies and consider them to be some of the best comic book movies out there, I can't pretend they're as compelling or deep in their political commentary as something like Oppenheimer, Spotlight, Civil War, or even other comic book content like The Boys, which is not, subtle or really that complex at all. Even the most politically savvy of MCU movies, though, like Black Panther or Iron Man, or the second 2 Captain America films, are pretty innocuous in their criticisms of systems, especially in their application of how to fix said systems. Again, this is the whole leftist versus liberal distinction of art and politics. Killmonger is, morally right about his problems, but he's a dick and he has to die. The system stays the same, but the people running it are nicer and help the poor kids playing basketball more. That's liberal. A truly leftist Black Panther film would see Killmonger burn the Wakandan monarchy to the ground and replace it with a more global and egalitarian system, not just appoint himself to being king and declare war against the world or whatever he does. Again, this is why, it almost makes sense that people would claim the movie is conservative, but, it still isn't. And finally, there is one other genre of non-political movies. Movies made specifically for the anti-woke crowd. I mean the type of thing you'll find on the Daily Wire streaming service, like What is a Woman or Lady Ballers. Benny Shapiro likes to market these movies as non-woke. Movies for people tired of mainstream politics in their movies, but then makes movies which are still inherently political, catered to a specific and narrow worldview, and built a complete ideological retaliation to the mainstream left, which still makes them political, if not more political than the content they're trying to depoliticize. But now to the whole question of the video then. When did all this happen? When did things get so political?
What happened to the American dream?
What happened to the American dream? It came true. You're looking at it.
I mean, yeah, that title card pretty much said it. Politics and art is nothing new. I don't know why everyone is suddenly so mad about it, though. Well, I do. As mentioned, guys like Ben Shapiro and cultural politics are a big part of it. But really, art and movies have always been political, and most majorly acclaimed or classic works are classic because they're political. I mean, look at Charlie Chaplin and The Dictator all the way back in 1940. Before that, the vast majority of films were literally just like military propaganda, which doesn't mean they're not political. Leni Riefenstahl, as mentioned, pioneered a ton of modern filmmaking techniques, and her films were, well, very political. The Birth of a Nation was beloved at the time because it was explicitly racist. Again, just because the politics are bad doesn't mean they're not politics. But beyond just movies, we of course have books, we have comics, and we have music. What's really baffling to me are the number of Gen X people who are proudly anti-woke and anti-political, but will proudly repost like War Pigs by Black Sabbath on Facebook. Like, bro, how are you gonna grow up in the 80s, love 80s music, especially 80s rock, and then suddenly be mad about left-wing politics in 2024? Is this just something that happens when you hit 50? There's a Rolling Stone article about this that I absolutely love. In 2023, Pink Floyd updated their profile picture to this, and people were mad because they thought Pink Floyd was supporting LGBTQ people. I mean, look, first of all, Pink Floyd has been using the prism for literally 50 years, and even if it were pro-LGBTQ, why would you be surprised? Pink Floyd as a group has been pretty clearly like anti-establishment, anti-war, and leftist and progressive like forever, especially Roger Waters. It's like a famous thing. For rock specifically, the whole point was always to be counterculture, to be anti-authority and anti-establishment. That was like rock's whole identity, going back to its inception, along with blues. Punk is the biggest example of this, and groups like the Dead Kennedys made it their entire point and personality to be annoying about their politics. With songs like Kill the Poor and California Uber Alles, which, to be clear, was attacking Jerry Brown, governor of California, a Democrat, there was an obvious political message there still. Even the Ramones were being political with things like the KKK took my baby away, and I think it's pretty clear what they're upset about in that one. Another example I love is Republican Paul Ryan and Rage Against the Machine. Per The Atlantic, Paul Ryan's favorite band is Rage Against the Machine, and at least one member, Tom Morello, totally hates him. Ryan claims that he likes Rage's sound, but not the lyrics, wrote Rage guitarist Morello in a column for Rolling Stone that went up last night. He adds, well, I don't care for Paul Ryan's sound or his lyrics. Burn. If you haven't been keeping up with Ryan's likes, the P90X, the hunting, the sleeping in the office, the big suits, we don't blame you, since it's easy to get lost in all of them, and not just those huge suits. But music is a touchy subject, and political in its own right, so when someone says they like a band, there's a lot of meaning to it. And we've seen our fair shares of bands tell politicians to stop playing their music at events. Tom Petty and Michelle Bachmann come to mind. But Ryan picking Rage is, well, just weird. Another similar incident occurred when some random man on Twitter told Rage Against Machine member Tom Morello to stay out of politics, and Morello responded with, "Ooh." And per an article in the Detroit Metro Times, Castanada's tweet is remarkable because, well, what machine did he think Rage Against the Machine were raging against exactly? My absolute favorite, and by favorite I mean most horrifying example of this, however, is the rights appropriation of CCR, specifically Fortunate Son. I have a very fond memory of riding the pickup truck with my dad as a young boy one night as he played Fortunate Son on the tape deck and explained the song and its lyrics to me. He explained its anti-war message and critique of a system that forced poor people to fight in a pointless war, and decried the ability of the rich and powerful to escape said war through their contacts, either political contacts or just money and influence. Imagine my confusion, then, as an adult, when I saw Donald Trump use Fortunate Son at one of his rallies, a 5-time draft dodger who was able to dodge said draft due to his money. But, hey, don't take my word for it. Here's John Fogerty, who wrote the actual song.
Well, recently, the president's been using my song Fortunate Son for his political rallies, which I find confounding, to say the least. I wrote the song back in 1969 at the height of the Vietnam War. Something I was very upset about was the fact that people of privilege, in other words, rich people or people that had position, could use that to avoid the draft. The very first lines of Fortunate Son are, some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue. But when the band plays Hail to the Chief, they point the cannon at you. Well, that's exactly what happened recently in Lafayette Park when the president decided to take a walk across the park. He cleared out the area using federal troops so that he could stand in front of St. John's Church with a Bible. It's a song I could have written now. And so I find it confusing, I would say, that the president has chosen to use my song for his political rallies when in fact it seems like he is probably the Fortunate Son.
CCR and Fogerty are not the only artists to be in this predicament either. Bob Dylan and Neil Young have been in similar situations, unhappy at their anti-establishment works being used by a pro-establishment politician. And yet somehow, conservative fans of these songs and artists act surprised when these artists come out as anti-conservative in 2024. Hence why I say that they just weren't paying attention over the past 40 years. Another big part of this is people misunderstanding satire and taking it at absolute face value. I've said this before and I'll say it again, but the single biggest thing to understand about art in order of adequate media literacy is that depiction does not equal condonement. Ergo, a movie can have a character who is a murderer and not be pro-murder. My favorite example of this is Apocalypse Now, specifically the character of Kilgore and the entire Ride of the Valkyrie sequence. The scene is not supposed to be cool. It's ironic. In a genre where scenes of the US military just tearing shit up is supposed to get the audience excited and look epic, Apocalypse Now is using triumphant music to juxtapose the unnecessary might and cruelty of the US military with the quiet docility of the Vietnamese. You aren't supposed to be rooting for the Marines or the Army, even in the most basic, out-of-context portrayal of the scene. But when you add in the fact that this entire massacre is just an excuse to clear the beach so some of the characters can go surfing, and the guy behind the whole thing is literally a crazy man named Kilgore, it's pretty obvious this isn't supposed to be celebrated. Might does not make right in art, especially leftist art, which is what differentiates it from conservative or right-wing art. Again, see Homelander, a villain who epitomizes and represents the Randian view of a hero. So later in Apocalypse Now, when Kilgore says, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," you should be thinking, wow, this guy's messed up. And everyone got that, right? Right? Nope! A woman I work with, teacher by the way, frequently comes to school wearing an official US Air Force hoodie which says, "I love the smell of jet fuel in the morning." Okay, so we're just outright acknowledging that the Air Force commits war crimes? Like, is that the point of this? Perfect example of this misunderstanding is the scene from Jarhead, when the soldiers cheer, clap, and scream their way through the massacre. Jarhead is satirizing people's view of satire, and also satirizing other mainstream war movies which portray war and combat in a heroic way to boost recruitment and retention among soldiers. Movies like ones on that greatest conservative movies list, such as Maverick. Let's not forget that a requirement of using official US military equipment or aid must depict the military in a positive fashion, making such films inherently shallow and conservative as they're exclusively made to maintain and celebrate the status quo. Famously, Apocalypse Now had a disastrous production, due in no small part to a lack of funds or equipment from the US military. Now, however, the military is happy to ape the actual point of Apocalypse Now and make money off of it. And if that isn't the most ironic and disgusting display of the messed up capitalist nature of the military-industrial complex in relation to art specifically available, then I don't know what is. But now finally, I reached the topic which really inspired me to make this whole entire video, the whole thing, and that's Amazon Prime's hit TV series, The Boys. The Boys was something I've been wanting to watch since it debuted in 2019 or whatever, but I just never got around to it and could never convince my girlfriend to watch it with me. I finally got her to watch it this summer as season 4 aired with the preamble that there was controversy, and people were mad that the show went woke. So we smashed click on our Roku remote and started watching season 1 episode 1, and well, gotta tell ya, the show's woke and political from like, the first couple scenes. And I mean, it's not even subtle. The worst guy in the show, Homelander, wears an American flag and murders people for a private company. A mega corporation owns everything and has no ethics. The US government is in shambles and powerless to help the common person because of a corporation's malice, wealth, and influence. The heroes are a multi-ethnic group of aggrieved, down-on-their-luck boys, an occasional girl, who are desperately trying to subdue and rein in the power of said corporation and superpowered monster. Homelander, Stormfront, Firecracker, and Vought are so obviously right-wing caricatures that I genuinely don't understand how people missed this. Stormfront specifically talks about the Great White Replacement. Homelander's a classic Randian Ubermensch, all the villains are racist nationalists, and Homelander's whole goal is to be loved and aggregate complete control. Sound political? Sound like Civil War? That's because it is! Maybe it's because people get lost in the superhero satire and ignore the political satire, I don't know. Or maybe it's because the show will occasionally poke fun at the performative justice of corporations, such as the black and white "I take responsibility for racism" gag. I think a lot of people interpret this as, the show is making fun of woke anti-racism identity politics. However, that's clearly not what the show is actually making fun of. It's making fun of corporations. The company, as the Alien franchise would call it, pretending to be anti-racism while engaging in and profiting from the very systems and practices which create and perpetuate racism. The show is very clearly anti-racism, and the villains are just pretending to be so they can make money. Again, just for anyone who's confused, I offer this scene from Stormfront.
People love what I have to say. They believe in it. They just don't like the word Nazi.
Or the scene when Homelander refuses to let a Muslim in the Seven and refers to her as Captain Al-Qaeda. Homelander specifically is supposed to be funny in this context, but the racism isn't what's funny. This is satire, and you're supposed to be laughing at the stupidity of Homelander and people who think like him. This is the same style of humor as in Blazing Saddles, where the humor isn't the racism, but the satire and parody of people who are racist. However, in classic conservative fashion, people miss this, and Blazing Saddles ends up being a great conservative movie simply for the fact that it's not politically correct, even though it's a very leftist narrative. A few months ago, I made a controversial video called Literally Me Characters, Men in Misunderstanding Media, and I wish I included more about Homelander in that. The amount of people who actually like Homelander and think he's supposed to be a hero because he has a tragic or sympathetic backstory is appalling to me. Homelander fits perfectly into the Literally Me archetype, and Homelander fans are so dense that they don't realize The Boys, least subtle show of all time, is actively making fun of them. You are not supposed to agree with Homelander or Soldier Boy or Stormfront. Their depictions of what our heroes, Superman, Captain America, would look like if they were evil. If you agree with anything they say or do, then you are the butt of the joke. Like, in Season 2, there's literally a painting on a barn with Homelander's cape as the Confederate flag. His supporters wear red hats. He kills a man in front of a crowd and loses no supporters. The opposite, actually. Just like a certain someone in America once said he could do. But because Homelander cool, audiences interpret it as Homelander good, which is why I think it's so important to again recognize that depiction does not equal condonement. This is somewhat similar to why people have beef with Zack Snyder's Watchmen. The whole point of Alan Moore's story is that superheroes wouldn't be cool in real life. They'd be too powerful and dangerous, just like in The Boys. But in Snyder's film, they're depicted with a lot of slow motion and hot, tight leather suits, which makes them into generic superhero figures that are extra violent, but extra cool. Now, I personally don't really feel this way about the film, but I understand why people would. And in the earlier seasons at least, I also think the reason The Boys might have duped some people is because it doesn't come right out and say something's obvious as Trump bad, and kind of like Civil War, almost sort of pretends to be arguing against ambiguous political ideologies instead of a specific guy or group. I think that's being too generous to the show still, however, again, it's pretty on the nose. But unfortunately, satire doesn't matter if your audience can't recognize it, and unfortunately, audiences are regularly unable to recognize satire. Apocalypse Now and Blazing Saddles are great examples of this. Any satire is propaganda if audiences aren't smart enough to tell the difference. But to credit audiences a little, to recognize satire, you do have to already be familiar with what's being satirized, and also just know what satire is, which isn't always something you can intuitively feel, unlike parody. Anyone who watches Scary Movie or The Hunger Pains knows it's not serious. They can laugh and understand the parody or pastiche without having a thorough understanding of the material being parodied, because the jokes are visual, surface-level digs based on tropes or easily recognized iconography. To understand satire, however, you have to understand what the original work is, and to a degree, common criticisms of said work. If you don't know anything about Superman, Homelander still makes sense as a character in The Boys, but he's lacking half the commentary the writers are trying to project with him. How much any of that matters is up for debate, but I think it's an important thing to point out. I mean, I can't fault someone for missing a reference to work that they're not familiar with. How then, or why can an audience be so unfamiliar with something as seemingly basic as satire or other common storytelling techniques? Well, I'm going to tell you. As a teacher, I think it has something to do with this. The curse of the curtains are just blue has doomed us as a species. This joke, meme, whatever, came from and contributed to an attitude of anti-intellectualism and critical thinking that I see pretty much everywhere. That what is on the surface is all that there is at all, and any effort to extrapolate a deeper meaning is a waste of time peddled by boring English teachers who have nothing else to do. Homelander wears an American flag cape because he's an American hero. What do you mean he's supposed to be like a drone strike? Homelander's cape as the Confederate flag is just a funny joke. The cool music while the army kills Vietnamese means the soldiers are cool. Fortunate Son being synonymous with Vietnam means it's pro-American. In part, people are missing out on satire because they aren't being given the crucial definitions and background knowledge needed to understand it while in school. Specifically, while in English classes. Or like, they are getting it, they're just not paying attention or taking it seriously. No, there isn't just one way to watch or understand a piece of art, but there aren't unlimited ways either. Artists use clues, like the curtains being blue, or the president disbanding the FBI, or the villain hating Chinese people, to create a subtext which contains meaning. A subtext you can only find and understand if you have the critical techniques and understandings to do so, or at least to try. Life is about learning and growth, and no one will ever have everything they need to understand everything. Not everyone will come to the same conclusions about the art they watch. However, if you refuse to engage with media outside of your worldview, or look at things beyond their most surface-level depictions, you will be sorely missing out on the true meaning behind your favorite content, and be sorely surprised when the creators behind your favorite content suddenly come out with an opposing political view than you would have expected. If you refuse to engage in Marxist, feminist, structuralist, critical race, or critical anything kind of readings of text, then yeah, I guess you'll only notice politics when a shitty mainstream blockbuster movie flashes a bright neon sign with whatever buzzword is relevant at the time to scream, "This is political." But why would you want to live that way? Or engage with media in that way? An unwillingness to explore art beyond its mainstream message or engage with it at all will make you look like the people all of these music groups from the 70s and 80s are beefing with on Twitter. You're going to miss the point of these works.
Thank you, Miss Gray. It was quite educational. However, it fails to address the issue that is the focus of this hearing. 3 words. Are mutants dangerous?
So, why is everything so political now? In short, because everything always was, and always is, going to be political. Audiences are just thinking about politics in a harsh and reductive way, which is intentionally limiting and based on rage. If nothing else, politics are just philosophy in practice. And because American culture, especially in public schools, has so denigrated and denounced philosophical thinking as useless and pointless, we have created this bizarre divide where politics are not ideas to be engaged with, but symbols we're told to be mad at. Symbols like gay people, black people, socialism, or women. Never mind the actual overt political systems in present media, like the stormtroopers in Star Wars being literally named after Nazis. Just turn your brain off and enjoy the movie. Unless, of course, a minority shows up. Then turn your brain on and be mad. Yes, a lot of mainstream movies have shitty politics and or depictions of social issues, but a lot of them also have pretty interesting, sometimes subtle, portrayals as well. Independent filmmakers are making great shows focused on the humanity at the heart of politics, and crafting beautiful art in the process. For as much as I complain about the general audience, they honestly pull through more than they don't. People connect with people, even if they don't necessarily connect with ideas, which is why it's important for audiences to keep seeing stories about people or circumstances outside of their own world or context. However, I think it's also important for audiences to have discussions about those stories and what makes them work or not work. It's important to engage with ideas from across the political or philosophical spectrum, but that doesn't mean that we have to validate hate or bad faith commentary from, again, faux academics like Ben Shapiro or rage-bait content creators who store more anger and division than actually exists. The majority of comic, movie, and book fans are open-minded and intellectually curious people, from wide backgrounds and varying political ideologies, and that's great. But with all of that said, I do think we need to shift how we talk about and view politics in America, especially in relation to the arts and media. Politics are philosophy, yes, but a philosophy which impacts how everyone in a shared community is able to live, or not live, their lives. Everything is political. Everything has always been political. And I think we should try doing a better job talking about it.